Major discovery here in the Pacific Northwest. A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
History says the first Americans arrived later. This discovery says otherwise. In a quiet part of Oregon, buried layers are forcing experts to pause and rethink everything they trusted about early settlement. The dates don't line up, the location doesn't fit, and the evidence raises a question no one expected to ask.
Archaeologists and students at the University of Oregon have discovered new evidence suggesting that Oregon could be the oldest site of human occupation in North America. We're talking 18,000 years ago, according to a new radiocarbon dating analysis.
How could people be here so early, so far inland, and under conditions thought impossible? The title points to a timeline pushed back. But what's hidden in the ground is far more unsettling. The answers don't come easy, and they're still unfolding. Challenging the accepted timeline. For decades, the story of human arrival in North America followed a clear and widely accepted timeline. Archaeologists pointed predominantly to the Clovis culture, dated around 13,000 years ago, as the earliest evidence of people on the continent. This model suggested that humans migrated from Siberia, crossing into Alaska, and moving south through an ice-free corridor carved between massive glaciers. It was a tidy explanation, fitting geological and archaeological data into a neat narrative. Yet, beneath the surface of this settled story, new evidence was quietly gathering. A challenge to everything we thought we knew. This certainty began to unravel with discoveries like those at Rimrock, a remote rock shelter in central Oregon. Found far from the coastal areas and well beyond the supposed migration routes, the site presented signs of human presence tens of thousands of years earlier than expected. The implications were profound, forcing experts to question not just when humans arrived, but how they managed to survive in places previously considered inhospitable during the peak of the last ice age. The deeper archaeologists dug, the more distant in time their finds became, stretching the timeline backward step by step. What made this discovery unsettling was not a single out-of-place object, but the entire structure of the site, its layers and artifacts. The evidence didn't just hint at earlier human life. It demanded an overhaul of historical assumptions. The sediments, tools, and remains obeyed all the rules of careful archaeological study, yet positioned humans in a world frozen and blocked by vast ice sheets. This contradiction was no trivial footnote. It struck at the very foundations of North American prehistory. Experts found themselves confronting a paradox. If humans were here far earlier than the Clovis culture, then the migration routes and environmental models had to be rethought. How could people reach and live in areas cut off by ice, with few known food sources and harsh climate conditions? Existing theories offered no ready answers, opening a window for new narratives that would explore overlooked possibilities, like coastal migration or isolated survival pockets in mountainous or volcanic regions. The timeline that once seemed rock-solid was now fragile and porous, pushed to its limits by the undeniable physical traces unearthed in Oregon. This site did not fit neatly into the archaeological framework, but instead stood as a provocative symbol that history was far more complex than textbooks had claimed. The old boundaries around human arrival in the Americas were fading, replaced by questions about who these earliest settlers were and how they lived. The revision of the accepted timeline has far-reaching implications. It not only alters maps and dates, but also affects the identities and legends of the first humans on this part of the Earth. It makes us think of communities of people who lived in strange surroundings and were already masters of life and death before we considered it possible. The audacity of this challenge is backed up by the painstaking evidence that can't be simply ignored, and that forces historians to redo the past from the ground up. The first breakthrough in the archaeological record at Rimrock Draw indicates that the journey back in time is not over yet. It compels us to inspect the strata of earth and rock with a fresh mix of curiosity and skepticism. The timeline is not merely being adjusted, it is cracking, and we have to see the most astonishing discoveries. As the timeline shifts, the story demands a closer look at the place where it all began to come undone. A rock shelter in Oregon, whose secrets would force us to reconsider human history itself. The discovery of Rimrock Draw. Rimrock Draw might never have caught the eye of archaeologists if not for an initial interest in studying Ice Age animals and environmental change rather than human history. The site is a modest rock shelter carved into a low rise in central Oregon, far from the coastal routes and ice-free corridors that traditionally guided thoughts about early human migration. For generations, this region was dismissed as too cold, dry, and isolated to support ancient people, leaving Rimrock Draw untouched and overlooked. When the University of Oregon team began excavations, their expectations were cautious and defined. They anticipated finding only recent deposits from the waning days of the Ice Age, mixed soil and scattered remnants left by animals or natural processes. Nothing about the site suggested it held the key to rewriting history. It was simply another piece of the larger environmental puzzle from a frozen era. But the ground had a deeper story to tell. Almost immediately, the stratigraphy defied those expectations. The sediment layers were remarkably clean, flat, and undisturbed, an archaeological dream of preservation. Unlike typical sites prone to mixing by water, roots, or animals, Rimrock Draw's layers sat neatly stacked like pages in a book. Dark bands indicated periods when humans returned, while lighter bands suggested pauses in use. This clear sequence enabled the precise reconstruction of events over millennia. Within these layers, stone tools emerged, not haphazardly tossed, but carefully placed in context. These artifacts appeared repeatedly across different depths and time spans, suggesting that early people returned to this shelter again and again. It was no random or transient stop. It was a known and utilized location deep into North America's prehistoric past. This realization shifted the site's significance overnight. The surprising stone tools were the factor that made the researchers reconsider the function of the area regarding early human habitation. Rather than the Ice Age being a time of deserted, inhospitable wilderness, Rimrock Draw had been a center of humans, those with knowledge, skills, and motivations. This goes against the trend of thinking that human communities could only stay in areas such as the coasts or ice-free corridors at that time. The finding of the shelter demonstrates how the goals of archaeologists can be changed at the very commencement by the ground. A location, which was initially selected for exploration of extinct animals, turned out to be the one proving the existence of early human ingenuity and adaptability far inland and much earlier than had been previously believed. What was thought to be a silent retreat of nature revealed itself to be a stage of early human drama and survival. The hidden depths of Rimrock Draw have been a point of contention regarding the migration, settlement, and the nature of challenges the humans faced during the last glacial maximum. It shines its light on the discovery and also on the unknown. The further the excavation goes, the more layers are opened for exploration, giving an impression of a story that is even older and more complex. This problematic ground, which has a perfectly clean geological record, is a real need for rethinking the very history of mankind, no longer as a straightforward southward route, but rather a mosaic of human presence, continuous use, and even unanticipated skill flourishing amidst the Ice Age landscape. The questions raised here about survival and adaptation lead naturally to understanding exactly what the layers and artifacts tell us, revealing how the past is preserved beneath the ash and earth. Preserved layers and human evidence. The remarkable preservation at Rimrock Draw is key to why its findings are so compelling. Unlike many archaeological sites where layers blur and objects move over time, this shelter's sediment layers remain sharply distinct and intact. This preservation creates a readable timeline, with each layer representing a chapter in the site's extensive and intermittent use. The clarity of these deposits allows scientists to connect artifacts directly to specific times without fear of contamination or mixing. Each stratum alternated between periods of occupation and abandonment, forming a rhythm to human presence. Dark layers contain stone tools and signs of activity, while lighter layers indicate times when the shelter lay unused. This pattern reveals that Rimrock Draw was not simply a one-time refuge or a fleeting campsite. It was a destination embedded in collective memory and tradition for millennia. Stone tools discovered within these layers confirm deliberate human workmanship. These are not random stones broken by accident or natural forces, but finely crafted scrapers with sharp edges designed for specific tasks. Their repeated presence at varying depths shows continuity over thousands of years. The artifacts speak of a people who returned, reused, and refined their tools, exhibiting planning rather than happenstance. The choice of material for these tools is equally telling. Made from orange agatized stone, which is absent from the immediate surroundings, these tools indicate long-distance movement or exchange. People either traveled afar to procure their raw materials or participated in trade networks, revealing complex social behaviors and a capacity for planning that challenges stereotypes about Ice Age inhabitants. Wear on tool edges provides a microscopic record of use. Under magnification, patterns consistent with cutting meat and scraping animal hides emerge. These marks align perfectly with experimental archaeology results using modern replicas, cementing the conclusion that these tools were practical instruments of survival. The evidence points to repeated, purposeful use rather than casual or experimental production. Significantly, some scrapers were found at depths indicating even earlier use than the well-dated butchering of large animals like camels. This pushes the presence of tool use back beyond 18,000 years, further straining the accepted timeline. The undisturbed nature of the sediments reassures that these artifacts belong to their layers and were not introduced later. This firm stratigraphic context means Rimrock Draw provides a reliable window into an ancient world of human activity, far predating the Clovis culture. Instead of isolated finds, there is a sequence of repeated occupation and sophisticated behavior. That pattern transforms the site not just into evidence of early presence, but proof of adaptation and survival amid Ice Age challenges. Understanding the depth and quality of this preserved record frames the next revelation: the discovery of butchered extinct animal remains that directly connect humans to the landscape in extraordinary ways. The findings move from tools alone to the very acts of hunting and processing massive Ice Age creatures. This combination of pristine preservation and human evidence establishes Rimrock Draw as a cornerstone for rethinking the origin story of North America's first peoples. Beneath the layers of earth and the ash that sealed them lies a discovery so profound it would soon overturn the timeline once thought immutable. The camel bone revelation. Beneath a thick, undisturbed layer of volcanic ash, a signature deposit from Mount St. Helens's eruption more than 15,600 years ago, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary: Among the well-preserved layers at Rimrock Draw lay the jaw fragments and teeth of Camelops hesterus, an extinct giant camel that once roamed North America. This enormous creature, nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, had been believed to have vanished far earlier than the date suggested by the site's deposits. The presence of these remains challenged the prevailing timeline of both animal extinction and human habitation. What made the discovery even more striking was the arrangement of these bones. Rather than being scattered by natural forces or carnivores, the camel remains were clustered tightly, as one might expect if the animal had been deliberately processed. Such a pattern is rare outside of human activity, raising immediate questions about who or what caused this accumulation and why. This was no random death site. It bore the marks of intent and use. Careful examination revealed cut marks on the bones, precise, repeated lines at joints typical of butchering. These were not superficial scratches caused by trampling or scavengers, but distinct incisions consistent with sharp stone tools. This critical evidence linked the camel directly to human action, marking it as a prey animal actively hunted, or at least processed, by early inhabitants. The precision of these markings underscored a sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and tool use. The volcanic ash layer sealed beneath these bones offered a geological timestamp impossible to ignore. Since volcanic ash falls quickly and evenly across wide areas, everything beneath it must predate the eruption. The fact that these remains rested under that ash layer meant they were at minimum 15,600 years old, already predating the accepted timeline for arrival in Central Oregon, and consequently, North America as a whole. The analysis even went a step further by applying radiocarbon dating to the camel's dental enamel. The dating yielded an incredible result of about 18,250 years ago. This was not an uncertain approximation, but rather a solid, independently corroborated date that securely placed human presence in the area many millennia before the Clovis first window. The ramifications were felt far and wide and across different scientific disciplines, incurring the demand for new interpretations. All the possible alternative explanations for these discoveries were scrutinized in detail and turned down. The species identification was spot on, the butchering marks were clearly human, the volcanic ash was dated with high reliability, and the sediment layers indicated no mixing or intrusion. For the traditional migration timeline to be valid, all of these pillars would have to simultaneously be wrong, and none of them showed any signs of being erroneous. The evidence was solidly united, robust, and unassailable. This indicates that there were humans in Central Oregon at a time when huge glaciers covered the majority of the northern continent. The conditions in the environment should have made it almost impossible to survive there, at least according to the earlier models. However, the evidence showed that the human presence was deliberate and consisted of repeated activities, thus changing the prevailing concepts about the areas and times of human habitation during the last glacial maximum. The camel bone find was not merely a date revision. It effectively dismantled the framework that scientists had relied on to infer the migration of humans into the Americas. It brought about a confrontation that was not limited to one fossil or one location, signaling a considerable shift in archaeology and anthropology. A wider comprehension that early men were not merely idle wanderers, but rather expert hunters with complicated manners of living and thriving in those areas that were once thought to be unreachable until much later developed from this amazing discovery. Transitioning from the animal remains to the tools used to process them reveals an even clearer picture of deliberate human action beneath the ash. Stone tools as proof. Directly associated with the butchered camel remains were stone tools that clearly demonstrated human craftsmanship and intent. These were not mere rocks broken by chance, but carefully shaped scrapers designed with sharp edges, optimized for cutting meat and scraping hides. Each tool bore intentional flaking patterns, consistent from piece to piece, signaling deliberate manufacture rather than natural fracture. The craftsmanship revealed a population capable of producing specialized implements suited for their survival needs. The material of the tools added a further layer of insight. Made from orange agatized stone, these scrapers originated from a source not found near Rimrock Draw. This meant either the toolmakers traveled significant distances to acquire the raw material or engaged in early forms of exchange or trade with neighboring groups. Such behavior implies planning, mobility, and social networks that often get overlooked in Ice Age populations. Microscopic examination of the tool edges unveiled, telling wear patterns. Areas smoothed by repeated cutting and tiny fractures along predictable paths matched experimental data from modern replicas used to butcher animal carcasses. These worn edges demonstrated that the tools were not one-off creations, abandoned after limited use, but durable implements maintained and reused regularly over time. Further complicating the timeline, one scraper was recovered from a sediment layer below the camel remains, suggesting tool-making and use at Rimrock Draw predates even the 18,000-year-old radiocarbon date.
Oregon could be the oldest site of human occupation in North America. We're talking 18,000 years ago, according to a new radiocarbon dating analysis.
Stratigraphic principles affirm that deeper deposits must be older, and with no signs of soil disturbance, this deeper scraper firmly anchors human activity at a much earlier point than previously accepted. The impeccable preservation of the sediments meant these artifacts sat exactly where humans left them thousands of years ago, untouched by natural forces that often complicate archaeological interpretation. This accurate layering strengthens the claim that early humans repeatedly occupied and worked this site over extended periods. These tools were finely tuned for specific jobs, scraping hides, cutting flesh, with comfortable grips, showing signs of prolonged handling. They represent more than survival implements. They tell a story of skill, routine, and adaptation in a challenging environment. The presence and condition of these tools transform Rimrock Draw from a transient waypoint into a known and frequented habitat for early inhabitants. Their discovery alongside the camel bones transforms an abstract hypothesis into tangible proof. The tools do not merely coexist with animal remains by chance. They were the instruments actively used to process those animals. The connection between butchery marks and the scrapers creates a direct physical link to human agency in this icy landscape. Together, the specialized tools and the butchered remains form a compelling narrative of early humans strategically living and hunting in Central Oregon long before the Clovis horizon. This encompassing evidence challenges long-held theories and invites us to reconsider the complexity and reach of Ice Age human populations in North America. With physical proof of both prey and tools firmly dated, the scene is set to explore the microscopic clues that put the final seal on human presence in these remote layers. Residue analysis confirms human activity. While stone tools and butchered bones provide powerful evidence, the final confirmation came through microscopic residue analysis, one of archaeology's most precise scientific methods. Researchers examined tiny cracks and surface fractures on the stone scrapers to detect molecular traces left behind during use. These residues, trapped in minuscule crevices long after the tools were discarded, offered a direct chemical fingerprint of the animals processed by early humans at Rimrock Draw. The process relies on identifying proteins and biomolecules that can endure thousands of years when properly preserved. Unlike guesswork based on shape or wear, residue analysis provides a molecular record that ties tools unequivocally to their function. At Rimrock Draw, the tools were carefully cleaned to eliminate modern contaminants, then subjected to controlled laboratory testing to isolate ancient biological markers. The results were compelling and specific. The residue matched blood proteins from Bison antiquus, a massive Ice Age species long extinct and distinct from modern bison. This identification confirmed not just the presence of the animal nearby, but direct contact between the tool and fresh animal tissue. Such evidence dramatically narrows the possibilities, proving the tools were used in butchering or hide processing activities. Crucially, the protein signatures could not have entered the stone through environmental mechanisms like groundwater or sediment movement. Only direct cutting or scraping of fresh flesh can deposit and trap these biomolecules in the fine fractures of a stone edge. This fact binds the tools, the animal remains, and human action tightly together at a single moment deep in prehistory. The discovery of Bison antiquus remains tells us the size of the challenge that early humans encountered. The hunting and processing of such large and dangerous animals became a cooperative and planning affair that required highly skilled humans. The scenario was not survival by chance or small game scavenging, but organized big game hunting in a very tough Ice Age environment. The tools and residues depict a picture of people who are completely adapted to their environment. Residue analysis not only confirms tool use, but also changes Rimrock Draw from a place where only artifacts were found to a place with clear proof of past human activity. The molecular evidence is so strong that there is no other way to interpret it. It raised the site from a weird curiosity to a fundamental part in understanding the earliest human presence in North America. The dated camel bones and finely made stone tools, along with the residues found altogether, are removing the idea of human occupation being later or limited.
Latest discovery of stone tools, teeth of an extinct camel and bison show that humans have been occupying this landscape at least 18,250 years.
On the contrary, they reveal a complicated, repeated human presence, living, hunting, and thriving in Central Oregon tens of thousands of years ago, much earlier than the Clovis horizon. This definite molecular connection not only calls for the reevaluation of the timeline, but also of the early Americans' capabilities. They were not accidental wanderers, but rather resourceful, knowledgeable, and skilled people who managed to overcome Ice Age challenges long before anyone expected. With solid evidence in their possession, the researchers are now faced with the task of re-evaluating the migration theories that have been around for a long time, and also reconsidering the movements and ways of living of these first populations. The certainty brought by residue evidence leads directly to an examination of how these findings overturn previous models of human migration through North America's icy landscapes. Implications for migration theories. The undeniable proof of human presence at Rimrock Draw around 18,000 years ago intersects sharply with the geography and climate of that era, fundamentally challenging existing migration theories. At that time, North America was gripped by the last glacial maximum, when enormous ice sheets, the Laurentide and Cordilleran, covered vast swaths of the continent. These glaciers blocked key inland pathways that had long been believed to serve as migration corridors for early settlers. According to the long-standing Clovis First model, humans crossed from Siberia into Alaska and traveled south through an ice-free corridor situated between these giant glaciers. However, geological studies reveal this corridor did not open until thousands of years after 18,000 years ago. It was narrow, unstable, and ecologically barren at that time, an almost impossible route for large groups carrying families and hunting big game. If humans were already established in Central Oregon at such an early date, the Clovis Corridor pathway cannot explain their arrival. The land between ice sheets was not viable for travel or sustained settlement. This inconsistency means either the timeline of arrival or the migration route theories must be abandoned or substantially revised to match reality. The alternative that fits both the dates and environmental evidence is a coastal migration route, often termed the Kelp Highway. This theory proposes that early peoples moved along the Pacific coastline, taking advantage of abundant marine resources like shellfish, fish, and kelp forests slack with life, even during glacial periods. Unlike the frozen interior, these coastal areas provided a sustainable and continuous habitat conducive to human survival. Moving along the coast would have required advanced skills, including knowledge of boats or watercraft, navigation, and seasonal resource management. Such capabilities were once underestimated or dismissed by scholars, assuming early Americans were primarily land-based hunters following herd migrations. Rimrock Draw's evidence implies these early people were more technologically and socially complex than imagined. Moreover, the presence of distant raw materials used in stone tools suggests mobility and communication across regions, an indication of travelers or traders moving along these routes. This mobility supports the notion of widespread coastal networks that facilitated early human dispersal far earlier than the Clovis era. Rimrock Draw also challenges the assumption that early human populations rapidly expanded and spread upon entry to the Americas. Instead, the evidence points to an established and enduring population that adapted to various environments over extended periods. The Clovis culture may represent a later innovation or expansion rather than the initial arrival. This reframing of migration theories invites us to see early America not through the lens of sudden conquest via a single land corridor, but as a mosaic of diverse pathways and settlement strategies, with coastal routes playing a vital and perhaps primary role. Understanding these implications reshapes our appreciation of Ice Age human resilience and ingenuity, painting a richer story of survival along dynamic and challenging coastlines, long before the thawing of the interior ice sheets. With migration theories under reconsideration, the spotlight turns to the broader consequences of these discoveries for archaeology and the unfolding story of humanity's earliest footsteps in North America. The future of North American archaeology. The discovery at Rimrock Draw forces a major rethink of archaeology across North America. If humans lived in Central Oregon more than 18,000 years ago, long before accepted timelines, then many long-held assumptions no longer hold. Regions once dismissed as too cold, dry, or remote may contain crucial evidence still buried underground. Archaeologists are now compelled to broaden where they search and how they interpret what they find. Sites in mountainous areas, coastal shelters, and volcanic regions, previously considered unlikely for early human activity, are gaining new importance. Traditional methods focused heavily on surface layers and well-known migration zones. Rimrock Draw shows that this approach may miss critical evidence. Older, deeper deposits once ignored must now be carefully re-examined using advanced dating techniques and microscopic analysis to uncover signs of early human presence. This discovery also challenges the belief that the earliest human traces are always found near the surface. Rimrock Draw's clean, undisturbed layers prove that significant occupation can lie far below. Archaeologists must treat every layer as potentially meaningful, rather than relying on assumptions about age or relevance based on depth alone. Equally crucial is the information the site provides about human behavior in the earliest times. Rimrock Draw was not a place for the inhabitants to be simple explorers. They were making special stone tools. Big Ice Age animals were their targets, and they were coming to the same shelter again and again. These actions result in the showing of a human being with planning, skill, and social organization that are way beyond the old stereotypes of early humans. The scholars are now revisiting the idea of how adaptable and capable these populations really were during the last glacial maximum. The site also emphasizes the fact that human survival was very much dependent on the understanding of the environment. The Ice Age people living in the harsh conditions needed to know about animal behavior, the seasons, and the availability of resources. Rimrock Draw indicates that early man was a clever strategist who could live in an area that was previously thought uninhabited. This evidence also encourages a re-evaluation of the migration routes. Rather than one large wave passing through an ice-free corridor, the early settlement appears to be more intricate.
This latest discovery has not been published yet in a peer-reviewed study, but it does appear to show evidence of occupation thousands of years older than any other archaeological site in Oregon.
Coastal routes, repeated inland occupation, and long-distance movement for resources may all have been contributing factors. This wider perspective opens up new paths for research on how humans migrated across the continent. Not only archaeology, but these findings also impact our understanding of human history as a whole. A deeper timeline stimulates new ideas about cultural formation and adaptation under extreme conditions. Rimrock Draw is a place where many unanswered questions still exist, but at the same time, it has marked a turning point. It is a reminder for us that the past is not finished, and much of it still lies buried, waiting to be discovered. Rimrock Draw has shattered old timelines and changed how we understand early human life in North America. This discovery shows the importance of questioning assumptions and embracing new evidence. If you found this journey through history captivating, please like the video and subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know. Don't go anywhere. Check out the next video appearing on your screen for another fascinating look at how new evidence is reshaping what we thought we knew.